participants. Wish you a very happy CA day. I welcome you all on behalf of Northzone of Confederation of GST Professionals and Industries in India. I also welcome our learned speakers for today, Mr. Bimal Janji, who is a CA by profession, Mr. Sudipta Bhattacharya ji, is an advocate by profession, Mr. Tushar Agarwal is a chartered accountant by profession, Mr. Kapil Sharma, again an advocate, and Mr. Ishan Patkar, again an advocate from Bombay. CGPI is a national level alliance consisting of in-service and practicing lawyers, CAs, CS, and CMAs, focused primarily into GST divisions. CGPI main objective is to organize the indirect tax community into one common body so that a unified body can stand up for the interest of professional community as well as trade and industries with respect to GST. Through CGPI, we aim to create a platform of knowledgeable GST professionals of each state, city, and local area, and to bring all these leaders of the community under one common platform. I sincerely appeal to the participants who are not the members of CGPI to become members of CGPI, as there are certain benefits which are attached with membership only. Firstly, members get a right to participate in the intensive study sessions which are held on weekends. Objective of these intensive study sessions is to decode the GST law clause by clause. Recording of these intensive study sessions shall be made available to the members. Members will be benefited with respect to the paper presentations which are written and which are presented by the experienced GST professionals on various interpretational issues. These papers would help members in understanding the topics discussed. There are webinars related to various hot topics in GST which are accessible only to the members of CGPI. Recording again of these webinars shall be made available to the members only. CGPI is providing a national level platform and has been allowing with the trade and industries associations to take up their issues and representations at the appropriate authority. Keeping in view the above mentioned benefits, which are exclusive to the members of CGPI, we highly recommend the participants here to take the membership of CGPI. I sincerely hope that today's session would be very informative and knowledgeable. Request Mr. Rajiv Khandelwal ji to introduce you about Webtel, please.
Very good evening to everybody. Webtel, as you are all aware, is a software company which is in various compliances. We are pioneers of TDS and XBRL softwares in the country, and also various other solutions. And we have a team of professionals led by CAs, CS, and various legal and software professionals. Next slide. We have also partnered with the government for various initiatives. And we have a bouquet of products like Virtual Office, which are websites for CA firms, which a new offering, which is a mini ERP for CA firms. Also various TDS, income tax softwares, or a combination thereof, which is Goldmine, and WebEsign, which is for digital signing of documents, etc. So we have a bouquet of products, and our latest addition to that is a work at home solution, which we proudly call as WA. And in this pandemic situation, I think we all have faced problems in working properly, and because offices are not fully functional. And let us see this. Social distancing is a new norm in the unprecedented situation. Stay home, stay safe. While safety is a big concern, how long can we wait for the situation to become normal? How to keep working while taking necessary precautions is a challenge for everybody. We need a utility to let us work at home. What is WA or work at home? WA is Webtel's new utility which allows access from anywhere to Webtel, Talibusy, etc. other servers through virtual server in data center in India, available 24/7. And it also has an option through static IP in on-premise server. Now the question would be how WA works. Let us see. Get server access through WA. Softwares like Tally, Busy, Webtel, etc. installed on the server only. Only WA installed on employee PC, no need for other softwares. Employees can get anytime, anywhere access to softwares on server and access to user as per need to use basis. WA work at home solution for everybody to help you work. And this is how you will work. There will be a central server either on your premises or on the cloud. And each one of you can access the system server through your own homes. And it will be as if you are working on a LAN environment. Such good speed with necessary hardware solutions and the Webtel solution. A small step by Webtel for safety and security of your clients and the staff. Now this QR code is there, which you can scan on your mobile phones if you want to know more about WA utility. And already many of our CA friends and advocate friends, other professionals have already started working from home and on a very limited basis, they go to offices and they are able to work at home using WA utility. So you can use your mobile phones scanners to scan this QR code and know more about this WA utility. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, sir. As you all know that we have already completed 3 years of GST regime today. Let us go backwards and see what was actually the need for implementing GST. During pre-GST regime, there were diversity in taxes to be charged, which thereby has created lot of complexities and litigations. Foreign company coming into India and domestic companies both were facing lot of challenges in respect of compliance as well as law side of various acts, as there were overlapping provisions among these acts. With the implementation of GST, it was supposed to be a simple tax with an agenda of one tax, one nation. Shri Narendra Modi ji at the inaugural speech at the time of implementation of GST informed that due to transparency of GST, due to technology driven proven trials, gray areas are ending and the GST has inherent strength of eliminating the possibility of ordinary businessman being harassed by the officers. But in reality, we are of an opinion that litigation shall be almost at the same level as that was during pre-GST regime. Reasons to substantiate the above statement can itself be seen given the fact that more than 750 notifications, 1,000 advance ruling, 500 plus Supreme Court and High Court judgments, 400 plus circulars have been issued. In addition, there has been continuous change in law, GST portal, issues multiple retrospective amendments to make GST even more challenging. There have been significant challenges from both law as well as implementation side. With this background, we commence our webinar to discuss the major jurisprudence and propositions laid down in last 3 years. Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Tushar Agarwal, who is a partner at Tattvam Advisors. So, Tushar Agarwal has more than 10 years of experience in indirect tax, and he has worked with more than 8 years with Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan attorneys. He was also deployed with GSTN network for the purpose of GST implementations and has worked closely with the government officials. He has worked extensively with the government of India for the purpose of designing in GST returns, audit formats, and other reciprocating formats like ITC-04. He has handled multiple GST transitions and implementations projects, post-implementation reviews, transitional plannings, trainings, registrations, preparation of procedures and policies, and filing of returns, and helped business in optimizing their models. He has been an active member of various trade associations such as PhD, CREDAI, etc. And he has been actively involved in taking up various issues, industry issues with the government authorities and the GST policy wing. He has also made many research papers and articles in reputed national as well as international journals and has been acknowledged by various research agencies for his extensive input in the GST regime. Now, it is our privilege to have you on our forum, Mr. Tushar Agarwal. You may please start your presentation, please.
Thank you so much for your kind words. I wish happy CA Day and happy GST Day to all the participants. Coming straight away to the topic, in next 25 minutes, we will discuss the landmark jurisprudence and the propositions that has been developed under repeal and saving clause, input tax credit, reverse charge, and valuation. The first issue which have been faced by the taxpayers is whether after implementation of GST, can department come and raise a fresh show cause notice or an investigation? Can they start the new proceeding? We have witnessed multiple judgments on the very same topic. Friends, after implementation of GST, the erstwhile law, that is service tax law, excise law, was omitted and repealed. The impact of repeal is very wide. It means even if you have evaded the tax, the department cannot come and recover from you because they don't have the provisions, because the act has been repealed. It is then recourse is given to the saving clause. When we see the saving clause under GST, section 174(2) deals with saving clause, and it provides that the repeal of act will not affect any right, privilege, obligation, or liability accrued, acquired, or incurred under the previous act. Similarly, it says that any investigation, inquiry, verification which can be instituted, continued, or enforced. The real issue which the taxpayers were facing was whether department can continue only the existing litigation, or can they even issue a fresh show cause notice, can initiate a fresh verification or investigation. So we have two series of judgments. One category of judgment laid down the law that since the one section 174 uses the term instituted, it only covers the proceeding already initiated before the implementation of GST. So we have Gujarat High Court, Delhi High Court, Jharkhand High Court, all these kinds of judgment. In the second category of judgment, the court has laid down that when we talk about 172C, it talks about rights and obligations will be intact. So rights not only of the even of the department. So reading 172C and E together, the courts have laid down that all the investigations, inquiries, not only which have been instituted, but even new inquiries and new investigations can be done. So clear cut, we have two series of judgments. One laying down that you cannot do a new investigation, cannot issue a fresh show cause notice. Another laying down that government has enough power to issue a fresh investigation, issue a fresh show cause notice. So it will be interesting to see how in future finally the Supreme Court laid down the proposition.
Sorry, Tusharji, to interrupt you. Can we have full screen, because we are unable to read what's coming on the screen.
It's on presentation mode only.
Sir,
try to get it on viewing.
Now?
Yeah.
Now slideshow, sir.
Slideshow.
Now?
No, sir. Sir, slideshow.
I've done the slideshow only. Let me again reshare the screen.
Yeah.
Is my screen visible
Yes,
now?
yes, sir. Yes,
Screen is
sir.
visible.
In
Press
slides.
F5 or click
I've
on
done
slideshow.
I have clicked on slideshow only. Now,
Sir, I think you can continue. You can escape from this mode.
right.
Can you
Uh,
escape? Yeah, you can run like this. This is better.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, go on.
So what we have discussed till now is that we have various judgment on the issue whether a new show cause notice has been can be raised by the department or not. Clear cut, we have two categories of judgments. However, when it comes to service tax audit, please remember in service tax we have witnessed a series of judgments wherein the courts have held that service tax cannot be undertaken by the department. It's ultra virus. So Rule 5A got struck down. We had an amendment. Then finally, Delhi High Court in mega caps held that amended Rule 5A is also ultra virus, and it has been stated by Supreme Court. So in my view, if you get a service tax notice, etc., audit, etc., notice, then you can approach High Court for a stay. But in my personal view, when we talk about issuance of a show cause notice or issuance of fresh investigation, etc., apart from service tax audit, the powers under saving clause under section 174 is wide enough for the government to carry out any such investigation. Now, the second issue which we faced in last 3 years is whether state government can amend their VAT Act post implementation of GST. The issue arose in the case of Kerala High Court and Gujarat High Court, Reliance Industries. The issue is simple. Under VAT Act, we had certain limitation periods for assessment, issuance of notice, etc. What state government did, they amended the VAT law to increase the limitation period. They amended the law. They said that I will increase the limitation period, say from 3 years to 6 years, 5 years, etc. The tax player approached the High Court. They contended that since the VAT Act has been repealed now by 101 constitutional amendment, the power to amend or power to frame law with regard to sale and purchase of goods have been taken away, and all these acts have been repealed by June 2017. How can they make the amendments? High Court agreed with the taxpayer and said that when all the VAT acts has been repealed in June 2017, and once the act is repealed, it means it nowhere exists. How can the state legislature introduce a fresh amendment? They don't have the legislative competence to actually amend the law. So it's a very important proposition which we should keep in mind, wherein the courts have held down that state legislature do not have the power to amend the VAT legislature when the same has been repealed in respect of those commodities which are not retained apart from petroleum, etc. Now coming to input tax credit, broader propositions and judgments. The first is with regard to the CGST credit of the other state. Say I am in Delhi and I am availing a services from, say, Karnataka state of accommodation services. They charge me CGST and SGST. We all are clear that SGST is a law which is state-wise law. So obviously SGST credit will not be available. But when we talk about CGST credit, can I avail CGST credit in Delhi? CGST charged by the Karnataka hotel, can I avail the credit in Delhi? If we strictly see the rules and the regulations under the GST law, section 16, 17, 18, you will not find any specific restriction under the act. CGST Act is a single act. You will not find any specific restriction that you cannot avail a CGST credit. Obviously, the intention of government is never to give you a CGST credit of the other state. And when this issue came before Rajasthan Appellate Authority, they held that CGST and SGST law are parallel and go hand in hand. When SGST credit is not available, then CGST credit should not be available. Furthermore, the government is of the view that even in respect of IGST, if somebody is supplying you an IGST invoice, and if the place of supply is different from the location of the receiver, say I'm in Delhi, there is a supplier in Gujarat charging IGST invoice on Delhi, that is me. But he writes place of supply as Maharashtra, still I will not get the credit. This is because of the reason of the advisory issued by the GSTN, which says that in GSTN 9, ITC related to those invoices where POS lies in state other than that of recipient have been excluded. So government is of the view that you will get the credit only and only if place of supply of that transactions falls in the recipient state. However, there is no such clear-cut provision in the law. Maybe that may be the intent. So it will be interesting to see how courts actually laid down proposition in this manner in the next few years. This issue will definitely go to High Court and Supreme Court, and it will be interesting to see. Friends, under GST, there is a specific condition that a recipient has to pay consideration to the supplier within 180 days. So if the consideration is not paid within 180 days, then the supplier has to, recipient has to reverse the credit along with interest. And the proviso specifically says that this condition will not apply in case of transactions between distinct person or related parties. That will be deemed that the consideration has been paid. On this issue, there was an interesting AR in the case of Sangvi Movers, Tamil Nadu AR. In this case, there was an appellant wherein the head office of the appellant has entered into a contract with the recipient units, that is distinct person, different registration of the same legal entity. So they had undertaken an MOU, and there was a consideration clause in the MOU that for these kinds of services, I will provide this much of consideration. When the issue came before AR held that since you have entered into a specific MOU between distinct person, that is between head office and branches, and for the services given by head office to the branches, as per the MOU, branches is liable to pay consideration, then until and unless they actually pay the consideration, credit will not be available and they will be hit by this condition. They also laid down that netting off is not a mode of payment. When this issue came before appellate advance ruling, they overruled the judgment of advance ruling and said that netting off is also a mode of consideration. No issue, you can pay consideration by way of netting off, but they were silent with regard to actual need for payment of consideration. In my view, this to the extent the advance ruling laid down that in case of distinct person, you should actually pay consideration when there is an MOU specifying the consideration is incorrect. See, in case of supplies between different registrations, that is like cross charge, stock transfer, I'm talking about such kind of transaction. Even if you have mentioned in consideration amount in the MOU, does not mean that that is actually payable. You need to actually pay. There is no need to transfer the amount from say Rajasthan branch to the Delhi branch. These supplies in itself does not require consideration. These are not supply itself. It is only because of schedule they have been deemed to be supply. Hence, to my view, this advance ruling is incorrect to the extent it says that there should be an actual payment of consideration. The next series of judgments which we have seen in last 3 years is judgments on section 17.5C and 17.5D, which says that works contract services or credit on goods and services used for construction of immovable property other than plant and machinery for own account will not be available. So 3 kinds of issues is something which we have witnessed. First, what do you mean by construction on own account? If I'm carrying out a construction for myself and then renting it, is it a construction on own account? Second set of disputes which we have witnessed is what do you mean by plant and machinery? If I'm constructing a building, if I'm installing an AC, HVAC, fire extinguisher, etc., does it mean that I'm ineligible to get credit, or these will qualify as plant and machinery and I'm eligible to take credit? Third series of judgments which we have seen is what you mean by immovable property, whether something is movable, something is immovable. One of the landmark and famous judgment in the case of Odisha High Court, Safari Retreats. The Odisha High Court held that in this case, the taxpayers was constructing a shopping mall and they have rented this shopping mall on which they were paying GST. The issue was whether they are eligible to take the credit of the goods and services which they have procured for construction of mall. The Odisha High Court held that once the taxpayer is actually constructing a mall and immediately renting it out and earning rentals on which they are charging GST, and also the purpose of GST is to avoid the cascading effect, section 17.5D has to be read down to allow the taxpayers to avail the credit. In a nutshell, Odisha High Court allowed the taxpayer to avail the credit on goods and services which they have procured and the property which is subsequently rented out on which they are paying GST. In my humble opinion, I have some reservation on this judgment. This is still pending in Supreme Court. Appeal has been filed. See, the Odisha High Court relied upon judgments like Eicher Motor, Daiichi, etc., wherein there was a different concept of vested right. We all know Senvet credit or ITC is a vested right, but there is a difference between vested right and statutory right. Vested right is something when you eligibly avail a credit, and then government tries to take away that credit. However, in this case, when we read section 16 and 17 together, my eligibility in itself is questioned. So the way section 17 is drafted, it says if I'm using the property on own account, I will not be eligible to take credit. So own account means for my own use. When I'm renting it, I'm not further supplying the immovable property. I'm using it on my own account for renting purpose, for storage and warehousing purpose, etc. So in my humble opinion, placing reliance on this judgment will be a very risky proposition. But in any case, we have to wait and see how Supreme Court finally laid down the proposition. Now coming to the disputes related to plant and machinery, we had a Karnataka triple AR, wherein they held that indoor surveillance system, fire extinguishers, chilling HVAC system, air conditioner, and various kinds of DG sets, etc., which was installed in a building, CRED will not be eligible. And the reason which they have given is that when these items are installed in the building, they form part of immovable property. They get annexed to immovable property. Hence, they qualifies as immovable property and CRED should not be available. In my humble opinion, when we talk about installation of HVAC system, lift, excavator, surveying system, DG set, etc., even they form part of immovable property, still it's a plant and machinery. The definition of plant and machinery is wide enough. So if I am actually availing these services as a separate supply, issuing a separate work order, it should qualify as a plant and machinery. So this plant and machinery concept, what will qualifies as plant and machinery, whether storage tank is a plant and machinery, breakwater is a plant and machinery, big refining system, they are plant and machinery. These will be the interesting issues which we will face in future. To conclude, when we talk about construction of a building, we have something called a civil structure. Second is plant and machinery called, say, air conditioner, excavators, etc. Third is my movable items, say furniture, tables, etc. So long as I am able to substantiate that I am separately availing the supplies of plant and machinery and movable properties, I should get the credit. In ITC, there is a specific section 17.5G, which states that credit of goods and services on account of personal consumption will not be available. Now, we had certain ARs which had said that when you're giving, say, a rent-free accommodation to a managing director or they are staying in a hotel, etc., since it's for their personal consumption of the employees, credit should not be available. So what do you exactly mean by personal consumption in this section 17.5G? In my opinion, it has to be read qua the taxpayer. So there can be two kinds of taxpayer, an individual or a company. When I say I am an individual, I am a taxpayer, I'm using, say, a laptop or certain goods for my official work also, for my personal work also. Fine enough, credit will not be available. When we talk from a company's perspective, so whatever expenditure they incur on the employees, say staying in hotels, their flight tickets, etc., is it really a personal consumption by the company? It's a business expenditure which is being incurred by the company for its employees. Employees are working for the company. And to my mind, this condition of personal consumption has to be read qua the recipient of service, that is the company, and it should not be applicable. So these judgments needs reconsideration. The next set of disputes which we have seen in last 3 years is with regard to eligibility on various kinds of marketing schemes. Section 17.5 specifically says ITC in respect of goods lost, stolen, written off, destroyed, or given by way of disposed by way of gifts or samples shall not be available. So we had few ARs like Sanofi India, Maharashtra, and then Surfa Court, wherein it was held that where the goods which are distributed under various schemes, the credit of the same will not be available. In Sanofi India, they had come out with a marketing scheme wherein the dealers were given reward points on purchase of certain quantity of goods and later which could have been awarded. The advance ruling held that since contractually it's only a general scheme and contractually you're not obliged to pay them, not obliged to reward them, it is not way coming out of any contract, the credit on goods and services given as a part of marketing scheme to dealers will not be available. Similarly, the Karnataka AR held that the goods and services which you give as a part of various schemes and free will not be available. In my humble opinion, when we see section 17.5, please again read it. It says ITC in respect of goods lost, stolen or disposed of by way of gifts, etc. So there can be three categories. First, I'm actually giving certain goods free of cost, say gold coin free of cost, on Diwali occasion, etc. No issues. Credit is not available. When we talk about free services, say air travel service, I give them free Indigo vouchers, etc. Some service vouchers, etc. Since this is an expenditure which is incurred in the course of business and it is not specifically covered under 17H, 5H. So credit should be allowed. So the restriction under 17.5H is qua the goods and not services. Even though Karnataka AR held that free services, credit on free services is not available, to my mind, that judgment is, ruling is incorrect. The third point which we need to keep in mind is our contractual arrangements for providing the schemes. So if I contractually provide for an arrangement of giving, say, on purchase of certain quantity of goods, I am liable to give them X product free, Y product free, and there is a contractual arrangement which is entered with the customer, then in these situations, we can say that I'm not giving anything free. Effectively, what I am getting the consideration is for all the products which I'm giving to them. And hence, credit should be available. But we should keep in mind two important points. First is that in this, we have to keep two important points. The first important point which we need to keep in mind is that there can be a risk of composite supply or mixed supply. So if you are giving two unrelated products, say one at 12%, another at 18% together for a single consideration, then you may run into a risk of mixed supply, charging the entire consideration at higher rate. Second is that there should be a proper contractual arrangement agreed in writing. Then only you will get the benefit. Otherwise, the way advance rulings are being delivered on all these issues, most of the cases you face difficulty in taking the credit. Now, coming to our third issue, reverse charge mechanism. One of the most landmark and interesting judgment has been in the case of Mohit Mineral. See, in case of import of goods on CIF basis, I import the goods on CIF basis. It is the foreign shipping line who provides the transportation services to the foreign supplier. So the actual contract of transportation of goods from the foreign location to Indian location is between the foreign shipping line and the foreign supplier. I, as an importer, I import on CIF basis. Section 5(3) of the IGST Act provides and empowers the government to enable recipient to pay under reverse charge in certain cases. So Section 5(3) gives power to the government so as to make recipient of service liable to pay reverse charge instead of the supplier of services. Now, in case of import on CIF basis, it is the foreign shipping line who is providing the services to the foreign supplier. Who is the service provider? The foreign shipping line. Who is the service receiver? The foreign company who is exporting the goods. I'm only the importer of goods. So am I a recipient? So there is a vacuum in law. Under GST, under notification 8 by 2017 and 10 by 2017, they had come out with the deeming provision wherein they have deemed that importer will be liable to pay tax on such transportation services under reverse charge. So there was a vacuum in law which was realized by the Gujarat High Court, and Gujarat High Court categorically laid down that since I am not a recipient of service, since importer is not a recipient of service, and Section 5(3) can be used to permit collection of tax under reverse charge only through recipient route. Hence, the levy is ultra virus. Not only this, they even went ahead and said that the services itself is not taxable in India, and that's a very major proposition laid down. They held that tax can be imposed only on an intrastate supply or interstate supply. No doubt it's not an intrastate supply. In GST, we have a residuary clause under IGST Act, Section 7(5)(c), which says that supply of services in a taxable territory other than intrastate supply will be deemed to be interstate supply. So supply of services in a taxable territory. In this example, they held that when goods are supplied by a foreign ship, when the transportation services are supplied by a foreign shipping company to the foreign supplier, the service provider is outside, service receiver is outside, and just importer of goods in India, you cannot say that services is provided in India. It cannot be stretched to that level. So that's a very major proposition laid down under this judgment. And similarly, Calcutta High Court also followed the very same judgment. Another interesting dispute which we had witnessed is on the director remuneration. Whatever payments I'm making to the directors, whether whole-time director, independent director, non-executive, executive, we have all categories of director. We had multiple advanced ruling, and then the clarification came through circular number 140. In a crux, what it actually held that if your director is working in the capacity of an employee and there is an employer and employee arrangement, then whatever payments you are making to those directors, they will not be considered for reverse charge purposes and it will be covered under Schedule 3. So if you make a payment to an employee director, then these payments will not be covered under reverse charge. However, if you are making payment of say commission amount, sitting fees, etc., to a non-employee director who may be an independent director, etc., reverse charge will be attracted. And whether a company, whether a person is actually an employee director or a non-employee director has to be seen qua the contract with the director. You don't go by the designation. Even when we talk about whole-time director, the definition of whole-time director itself is an inclusive definition. So it includes a director who is in whole-time employment. So it may include another director also. So we have to be very careful with regard to the contract which I have entered in with the director. So if I'm making any payment to the director, rest be assured that no reverse charge is applicable so as long as they are acting in the capacity of employee, but you have to prove that they are acting in the capacity of employee through your contractual arrangement. Lastly, we will just discuss in another 5 minutes the landmark case on valuations. See, under GST, we know the unique concept of GST is the concept of supplies between distinct persons. They have made every registration of a single legal entity as a distinct person, and any supply of goods and services between these distinct persons is always taxable. Examples are stock transfer. Then we have example of providing support services of head office providing support services to branches. Then we have examples of giving of corporate guarantee by one related party to another related parties, multiple companies using the same common infrastructure. So we have various kinds of transactions which attracts GST as supplies between distinct persons or related parties. One of the most important issue arose with regard to the valuations between distinct parties and distinct and related parties. When we see the valuations, we have a concept of open market value, then we have a concept of value of supply of kind goods and quality, then we have a concept of 110% of the cost of production, residual value, and we have two provisos. The issue which came before various advanced ruling was that there is a proviso under valuation rule, second proviso to rule 28, which says that if my recipient is getting full credit, then whatever amount I show on the invoice, that will be treated as open market value and I should get the recipient, and that value should be the final value for the purpose of GST. The issue at advanced ruling level was some of the rulings held that you cannot directly go to the second proviso and you have to go sequentially. If open market value is available, opt for open market value. There is a first proviso which says that on stock transfer, you have to apply 90% of the value of the goods at which the goods are sold from the depot. So that 90% rule has to be applied. Later on at appellate level, all these rulings were overruled and it was held that we can directly go to provide second proviso to rule 28, and it's a welcome judgment, though we have seen that we should generally not rely much upon advanced rulings. They are generally adverse, but in the context of valuation between distinct persons, they have realized that we can directly go to the second proviso to rule 28, and as per second proviso to rule 28, where full credit is available to the recipient, then the value adopted on the invoice will be treated as open market value, and so is a welcome judgments. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you so much. Over to you, Pitamji.